Hey everybody, I am here with Hans, who is working on alternate hardware platforms that would run the MiSTer FPGA project, as well as a bunch of other very cool stuff. So thank you very much, Hans, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Many thanks for having me. It's my first time on YouTube in that format.
That's awesome. So you are very far off in a time zone right now, because it's kind of funny. I'm about to crack my first beer for the evening, and it is very early for you, right?
Well, it's actually not a bit late because I usually get up at about 3 a.m. or so, or 4 a.m. So
Whoa.
I'm actually was working for quite a bit, and I got even some success today. I got HDMI working on the thoracic deca board with the MiSTeX. So
Oh, nice. So what
uh,
what gets you up so early? Is that just kind of the way your brain works? You're up early and sleep early, or do you have a job that kind of requires you to be up at that time?
No, it's more like the first because I have to say I have a chronic health condition, so sometimes I just don't feel very well, and I would get up in the night and kind of being too fresh to sleep, and then I would get on the computer and just work something, and that makes me feel better if I do something fun,
Yeah.
and
I'm sorry to hear
also
that.
it's I'm how do you say, a victim of the medical industrial complex. So especially
Oof.
antibiotics. So my intestines are terminally messed up. So I've got that for 13 years. There's a yeast infection which won't go away, and
Oh no.
as a side effect of I didn't really know the dangers of antibiotics. So and now I have to keep a very strict diet with which I figured out with trial and error. And and sometimes, I get up and don't feel very well. But also the side effect is here also in the Indonesia, it's very hot. So actually, the early morning hours are really the most productive because everything's quiet and it's cool outside. And in the noontime when it's hot and everything and noisy, then it's better to not have to concentrate much. So and the stuff I do it takes a lot of quiet and concentration. Um,
Mm.
that helps me. And also in the early morning hours when I just get up, then I can solve my most difficult problems. So if I've got a real a hard problem, then it's the first thing I'm gonna do in the morning, and then usually I can fix it quite fast.
It's funny. I get some of my best ideas in the middle of the night, but I don't have the energy or focus to work on them. So my friend Mike Chi has, and Ash, Tian Fong, a bunch of my close friends have probably woken up to messages of me like, "Dude, I just woke up. I had this idea. Let's build this thing. We could wire this into that." And like, they're all very patient with me because some of the ideas are incredibly stupid because I'm half asleep when I write them. But there's been some really good ideas there. But I can get, as long as I get the idea down, I won't forget it. But if I just wake up, think about it, and go back to sleep, it's gone forever. Same with music. If I have
Yeah.
like a riff in my head, if I don't immediately record it, it's probably going to be gone forever, or very different. But then I actually go to sleep and I wake up and, kind of get my focus, and then I could dive hard into a problem. But those late night ideas, like the ideas come, but the actual work doesn't get done until I focus.
So do you play the guitar what's the instrument?
Yes, I actually used to be I used to be very good at it. I haven't played in over a year. I loved it so much. I was in a band that played a bunch of live gigs, and I got to play a couple of bigger venues, and it was very much fun. It was kind of overlapped with RetroRGB a bit, so a few people that follow the channel had come out and seen a couple of shows, which was great. But that kind of fell apart, and then life just got so busy, I just didn't have time to keep up. And when you play complicated music, you can't just pick up your guitar every 3 months and play Kumbaya and strum around a campfire. It's complicated stuff. It's muscle memory, it's practice. It's like being an athlete from your wrist to the tip of your finger. Yeah, if you don't keep up, you just can't do it anymore. So
Yeah, I have the advantage that because I'm typing a lot on the keyboard, that kind of keeps my fingers fluid. So if I want to play then on a gig or something, I just need to warm up a couple of hours on the same day, and then it's pretty good still. So, but
good.
I ought to practice regularly again. I was very intense for 10 years I focused a lot on the saxophone. I put in from 2 to 9 hours every day in practice. And then I figured out that kind of having to earn money with that really sucks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's kind of, I lost interest too, because, yeah, it's kind of 10 years of doing something intensely seems to be, or 8 or 10 years seems to be my limit. And that's why I got into FPGAs right now, because my previous job, I did it for 10 years and I just couldn't see it anymore. It's not because it was a bad job, it was a great job and was a great company, but I just couldn't stand doing the same thing all over again anymore. So I needed something else, and that's why I got into FPGAs.
So, is your job what brought you out to Indonesia?
What was that? My
Is your
job is
job what originally brought you to Indonesia?
no. That's a whole different story. It's a long story. So I was a Mormon missionary in Indonesia back in 2002, and then I got home, and yeah. To make a long story short, my wife is from here, and
Hmm.
so we live here, and I have 4 children. We have 4 children, better to say, uh, and. Yeah, so and she is happier here in her home country. She didn't like it she liked Germany, but she didn't have her friends, and that's very important for Indonesians. They are very social people, so they need their friends and family around. And I'm kind of a nerd, I'm kind of the antisocial type loner, that would enjoy spending countless hours alone in the chamber. Not antisocial, but not very socializing. Uh, so I like quiet and my privacy, and I like to stay in my room and figuring out stuff. And yeah, and so we moved here, and
It's kind of
so
interesting to see to see how different people interact with people, because like I love people, I love hanging out, I get energized when I hang out with my friends, but I'll also go like a month without seeing anybody, which is different because I get to hang out virtually via all this stuff. But for me, like my closest friends are the ones that I don't see for 6 months, but when I do, it's exactly like the last time we hung out. There's no, how come you haven't called me? It's none of that. It's just like, hey, good to see you, you're here, let's go hang out, let's have fun. And it's it's no pressure, just good friends. So it's always, it always makes me happy.
oh, that's great. It means you're very flexible. So what I have the greatest difficulty is kind of small group situations where the focus changes so rapidly that gets me really tired really quick. So I've got no problems kind of performing in front of 1,000 people or whatever. I feel fine with that. But those small group interactions, they're really killing me. It's just one-on-one is good because I can focus totally on one person. But because I tend to focus really hard, then if that changes, that's a lot of stress for me. So that's why I usually avoid small group situations. Well,
Yeah, everybody's different, and sometimes it puts pressure on people. For me, when I started doing these long stretches with RetroRGB, where I would just spend a full week, just wake up every morning and then work until I passed out at night and just break to eat and shower and stuff like that, I would go like 2 weeks without really seeing anybody other than my wife. And then I would show up at like Brooklyn Video Games and I'd feel so awkward for like 3 or 4 minutes because it's just, you got to snap back into human interaction. And then, but they're all awesome people. So 3 or 4 minutes into it, I'm back to being me, and it's fine again. But it was kind of, I guess, not funny, but funny to me in a twisted way. Where when the pandemic happened and all of the shutdown and the lockdowns, now I'd show up, and like 3 or 4 minutes later, I'm back to me again, and everybody else in the room's awkward because they weren't used to being locked away for weeks at a time. So it was a full role reversal. So I immediately recognized it and was like, all right, let me be extra patient because they're
yeah,
always
you know
patient
what
with
they
me
are
for the first two or
experiencing.
three minutes.
Yeah.
So. Now, when we first logged on here before, you showed me something that I kind of intentionally cut you off because I wanted you to talk about it here because I love stuff like this and I wanted it to feel fresh. You said you had built a MIDI interface or a multi-channel audio interface out of an FPGA, right?
It's actually both. So, yeah. To my, did I mention it? I got bored in my previous job, and so beside my work, I got into FPGAs. And my first really non-trivial project, or somewhat useful project, was an audio interface. Uh, so uh, This is what it looks like. So that's actually, so you can see here, it has two USB inputs. So this is
Hmm.
the only audio interface I know which has two USB inputs. And it also has two digital analog converters where you audio output for headphones. And then it has up there are eight optical terminals, which are in and out for ADAT. So each of those terminals can pass 8 channels. So you have a total of 32 channels, which going in and out over high-speed USB. And it uses an FPGA, as you see, and because it has no microprocessor, everything is implemented in logic, in hardware. So the interface in itself has a latency of about not even a half millisecond. So it says about 300 microseconds
Whoa, really?
latency. Yeah. So that's what I measured with the USB analyzer. So this is the specialty of FPGA. So they can react instantly because all of the circuits run at the same time inside of an FPGA, and that's not like a CPU or a microcontroller, which kind of has to do this and then run to another place and then do that and just run around all the time. And the FPGA can do everything at once, even if the
Hmm.
clock frequency is much lower. So it just runs at about 100 megahertz. Here, compare that to the 3 gigahertz of my PC. But yeah,
So it's so funny that you talk about this because what you just discussed, for anybody that's not a musician, I promise I'll make this quick. I won't go off on a long rant about musician stuff, but if you're recording into a computer, which is for most people the best way to do it because of cost, you have two choices really. You could, if your instrument is something that plugs in, so it's not a saxophone, it's an electric guitar, electric bass, whatever else, you could use something called a DI box. So one goes directly raw into your computer and the other one goes into your amp, and then you could reamp it later. And in that case, it's kind of like streaming, where latency doesn't matter at all. It could be a second off, but you're not hearing that, you're hearing it through your amp. But most people don't have that luxury. And in fact, recording at home, you very often don't want a lot of extra noise. So you have to go directly into your computer and listen to your computer monitors. And some audio interfaces are pretty low latency with their pass through, but most are not. So trying to record to a click track or to pre-recorded instruments or anything else, latency matters just as much as a pro gaming scenario. So
yeah,
that's why having a low latency audio interface is so important. But what Hans just explained from an audio point of view is exactly why FPGAs are faster than software emulation in most cases, not all, of course. But
yeah, and that
yeah, it's
also
funny how that
explains.
overlaps.
Sorry to interrupt you. That also explains why they are so good for retro gaming, because they can simulate the whole, not simulate, they implement the whole circuit at once. So the difference to software emulation is that on an FPGA, you have an implementation of the circuit in which every part of the circuit runs at the same time. If you have software emulation, the CPU can only do one thing at a time, and it runs around in circles, like the guy who is spinning the plates on the multiple. Only that you have a lot of plates for each circuit element. Yeah, the CPU runs around and tries to keep them spinning, but the order kind of needs to be important too, and so on and so on. So the timing of software emulation isn't the same like as in the FPGA. You can really design it that it has the same clock cycle behavior as the original hardware, more or less. So that's why they're so good for gaming. Yeah.
Yeah.
To get the curve back to the topic.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I was aiming at. What kind of made your jump from audio interfaces to the MiSTer project? Are you a gamer as well? Is this something, did you just kind of discover the MiSTer? Had you been following it since the beginning?
Oh yeah, actually the story is that I when I was a teenager, yeah, it was the classic age of retro games, the arcades, the consoles, the Sega Master System. My first computer was an Amstrad CPC C464, and then my main computer was an Amiga. And I learned a lot of my computer science skills on the Amiga, actually. And then I got at the magazine at the railway station my first Linux CD. Then I moved on to Linux. And I always had a lot. I grew up with the retro games, and So for the first time in my life, and those arcade games in Germany were really expensive. So for one game you have to put in 1 mark, which is something like $1,
Hmm.
and probably in America is a quarter or something.
50 cents for most of the games.
And yeah, maybe in Germany at that time it probably was comparable, but it was, for me, was out of question. I just could only maybe at those arcade games could play once or so, and then I was out of money, and you can't do anything there. And with the MiSTer, for the first time, I could have the same arcades, which were really expensive machines at the time, and I could just have them in that little box there, and play the original ROMs that were on the in the arcade machine. So I have my own arcade machine at home, and this is kind of really exciting for me. But actually, I'm not a gamer at all. So when I was a teenager, I still played games. So, but when I was early teens, maybe 13 or 14, I figured out I rather play with technology. That's and right now, if I start playing games, I get bored really quickly. So, but maybe 5 minutes or so, I get bored. I rather enjoy actually playing with the technology behind it. So that's why I'm actually doing this project, because my love for the retro games, and I really like the creativity behind those games and the originality behind those, and I enjoy playing with the technology actually, and that's why I'm into this. I don't
Yeah, I'm kind
actually.
of in the same place too. I just uh, the technology itself is kind of also an art. It just always made me really happy messing with this and changing it, and improving it, and modifying it. So it's always fun to dig into it like that.
Yeah, I really also enjoy designing PCBs, and that's something just I learned in the last year or so,
Hmm.
and yeah, and it's really a lot of fun to kind of to draw something in the computer, and then press a button, and then it comes back to you in physical form. That's really amazing. So with the Chinese factories which offer assembly like JLC PCB for a fantastic price, you get back a very, very good quality PCB assembled, and
I see
looks
you have
like.
the blue box behind you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you see, you see that there's not only one, there are several ones. Oh yeah, right.
See,
Yeah, we.
they sponsor my weekly podcast, but I really do use them. I've been using them for years. So I saw that box, I saw the flap sitting over there, and I'm like, well, I know what that is. I have quite a few sitting over here.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Me too. So one of my last projects was this here. This is USB 3 microcontroller board. So high speed,
Nice.
uh, so super speed USB. So 3 gigabit, 5 gigabit per second, 300 megabytes, and yeah, got it working. So
So, for anybody who maybe, I guess I want to introduce the work that you've been doing for anybody that hasn't followed it. I know we're kind of already 20 minutes in, but I'm enjoying the chat, so I think most people are probably would be too. But you're working on something that you're calling the MiSTeX, right?
yeah.
So,
So
do you want to give like an overview for people of what that is? Because I got very excited when I heard the work that you started.
yeah, so the background was actually that there's an South American group of people which speak a lot of Spanish too. They invited me to this chat for the Deca board. Actually, I wish, should I get it? No, well, that would create empty time. So the Thoracic Deca board, it's that guy here. Wait a minute, let me show it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see it here.
Yes, the one that's
Uh,
glowing over there. Gotcha.
with and that community kind of, they were a lot of into retro gaming, and I liked it too. I don't have the MiSTer actually at all. I have a similar board which is called the socket, the Arrow socket. It has almost the same chip on it as the MiSTer, and those community also made some ports. They ported the original MiSTer cores to that one. It doesn't need a lot of modifications because it's the same chip, but it has VGA instead of HDMI, so and a different audio output. And so I played around with that, and in that forum came up the idea. One of them, he wanted to make something like the MiSTer, but replace the Cyclone 5 because it's expensive, and the original board is subsidized. Actually, was subsidized, so it's like ST Microsystems, you win over a lot of engineers if you sell your development board for really cheap. Then the engineers buy it and play with it, and because they're already familiar with it and like it, then they use it in their project. So, and this is why the development boards tend to be subsidized. Now, the MiSTer project took one of those boards, which was fantastic cheap at the time, and especially with a 110K sized FPGA, and made it a game console. And it's genius because the hardware is ideal for that, and it was really uh, um, unparalleled in the value for money you get from this board. And in that forum, there came up the idea. One of them tried to replace the so in the Cyclone 5, there is an ARM system of a chip in there and an FPGA. And the ARM system of a chip runs Linux, and the Linux does all the input handling, like the game controllers and file management and loading the FPGA, the cores into the FPGA and stuff like that. And so, and one of the guys in the forum wanted to replace the HBS system with the embedded SoC with Raspberry Pi, and that's actually the idea which infected me. So it took a year or more until it became an urge just to try it, because the original board, yeah, it was unavailable for a long time, and also, yeah, right now it's available again, but it's kind of expensive. It costs $220 or something. And I really like cheap stuff, I like cheap Chinese stuff. And they're great at electronics. So the QM boards, which one of them saw already on the audio interface. Where did I put this? Yeah. So like that one, yeah.
Mhm.
So this is an Arctic 7 100T that is almost the same size as a MiSTer, as the FPGA and the MiSTer, but it costs only $80. So
Wow.
this guy here.
But that's just the FPGA. Does that also have a processor on there as well, an ARM
No.
processor? So then you would need the Raspberry Pi to go along with it, correct?
Well, but Raspberry Pis are really super expensive too. And that's why I came up with, well, they are all tied up. I put the camera there with Allwinner D1, which is a Chinese RISC-V chip. RISC-V is a new open source architecture. And it only costs $16, has a gigahertz processor in it, 512 megabytes RAM. And this runs twice as fast, actually, as the original MiSTer core. They run about 400 megahertz, but they have two cores, I must say. But for latency, probably the faster one is better, I guess. So I made a little development setup. Let me show this, like there. It's hard. So you see a lot. Let me see. That's kind of okay. So what you see here is the FPGA. Here's the FPGA, and then there it has VG. The daughter board, which is also from QM, has a VGA port on it. Then here it has some general purpose IOs from the FPGA, which I connect here to the Allwinner D1 board. So you see this only costs $16, this little board. And so this is connected up there. The green PCB you see is actually only a digital to analog converter. So this just connects an SPDIF to audio. So that's for the sound. And I've got a little keyboard here this is a normal keyboard, but it has enough keys for the MiSTer and to save space on the desk. So I replaced this with that little guy here, and fortunately, it only needs a couple of I/O lines. You can see here, it actually needs only 8 wires actually to the FPGA, and I modified the MiSTer software that it runs over that. So that took me about a week or so, and in total a month to get it going, to have playable cores. And
So I would love to hear a little bit about that process, but I just would like to pause for a moment just to kind of bring everybody up to speed. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my strong opinion that the number one reason for doing something like this is longevity, because the DE10 isn't going to be made forever, and the fact that you're starting to look at alternative hardware platforms just means that the MiSTer project is going to go longer. But it also is a cost savings on top of that, and there's the potential for more powerful and future or different hardware on top of that. Am I getting all of that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly all the points I wanted to mention. So there are a couple of reasons why I would like to be able to port it to other FPGAs, and one so I cost saving was one aspect, but a lot of people maybe. So for me, for example, I don't really bother much about the really big cores like the 486. So I don't see really the point to have a big FPGA emulating an old PC when I have a new PC in front of me. I can run something like DOSBox. But yeah, but there are something like Split Play, the PlayStation X Core, but it still fits on the MiSTer. But there are others like what was it? There's a Nintendo,
The DS wouldn't quite
the
fit in there, I
DS,
believe.
right? And
Same, the
so
N64 is questionable, I believe.
the what?
I believe the
N64,
N64 is questionable. It's
right?
probably not going to run on the DE10.
Right. So for me, I didn't grow up with that hardware. I kind of bypassed it. So I really was concerned about the arcades, and as they run actually quite fine with even
Hmm.
smaller FPGAs. And so one idea was making a cheaper version of it. And the other thing is, other guys really want to run bigger cores like the N64 on it. So you could, and with my framework, you can actually go in both directions. You can do one spin for the cheaper uh, uh, side of things, and you can just do another thing for the powerful one. So from QMTech, you can get now a Kintex 325T for $99, but there are only a kind of two of them left in stock, and I don't know if they reproduce them because they are from retired mining hardware. So
And
they
what about
usually.
the opposite side? Is there hardware out there that could do 4K 60, for example?
Or you mean no, with K? I mean the number of thousand logic elements of the of
No,
the.
I'm talking about video output. Like, are there development kits out there that are very expensive, but you could still use your framework to run it on there, so you can get a true 4K 60 video output?
That would be possible, yeah, but you would need a rather high spec FPGA with probably with high speed transceivers on it.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I don't know how much sense would that make for retro gaming, because you have to scale it up anyway. So, and then what's really the point having the high frame rate, except you have cores which go in that
Well,
direction.
there's a
But
couple of easy answers for that. So first, some panels just look and run better when you're only running them in their native resolution.
oh yeah, sure.
Computer monitors are 90% of that. TVs usually scale decently well, but in my limited experience, I've only seen 50 to 100 newer monitors in the past few years in all the places that I've worked at. But gaming places, but still all of my experience shows that if you send a 4K monitor a 1080p 60 signal,
Yeah,
it's
it
going to
doesn't look
look
too great.
fine, but not nearly as good as if you actually just sent it a 4K signal. There's some concern with latency. I don't really think there's much at all. But then there's also CRT emulation filters that tend to look a little bit better at the higher resolutions. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, while you're right, you don't need to run retro in 4K. There are some advantages to it, and it's also just kind of a neat thing, right? It's the
I
same
agree.
thing. Where some people will spend $1,000 on a set of speakers, and other people will spend $100 and think you're crazy for spending 1,000, and the people that spend 1,000 think this is the greatest thing in the world. So there's, it's just kind of that as well too.
Oh yeah, I never really thought about it, but it totally makes sense as you say to me. So it makes really sense to think about it. So there are kind of like beastly FPGA boards like this one I've got up here, which I have up for a paid work project. This is this guy here.
Mm.
So let me pull this away. So this is a Kintex 325T. It's also one of the retired mining hardware from AliExpress. This board costs only $200, $220, like the MiSTer actually. and it has is about three times the size of the MiSTer.
Whoa.
And it has high-speed transceivers on it, and it also has an HDMI port. And this might be able to run 4K 60. I don't know if the HDMI port could do it. Probably it could, I guess. You probably could make it do that. So this would be kind of a beastly FPGA. The little green board that you saw up there was a Raspberry Pi 4 CM4 board, so which is actually quite powerful enough to emulate retro games on its own without the FPGA. But yeah, I use this is a part of a different project. A paid project I'm working on. So yeah, it might be one day I might report it to the tool. So the nice thing about the current framework I'm working on, and that's why it's called MiSTeX. It's actually the MiSTer, but the EX comes from a project named LiteX, and LiteX is a system on chip generator for FPGAs, which is one of the most popular FPGA open source projects out there. And what this project does, it lets you build systems of chips in very different configurations for about 100 or more development boards. So this project has the kind of the board definition files for about 100 or more development boards, and I contributed also about 10 boards to that project. Because like all FPGA developers, I have gear acquisition syndrome. So buying FPGA boards is kind of it can get really addictive, and it's about time I'm stopping now. But now with the MiSTeX project, I got another reason to buy some more. So and what it did. So the thing is, if I use that framework, I can actually very quickly build the MiSTer for different kinds of boards and different kinds of FPGAs, because the wiring is all in those definition files, and I just need to say what goes where in a very general way. And so the LiteX framework does the rest. That's why I called it MiSTeX. And also it means kind of like MiSTer expanded or extended.
I love it.
So
can we just back up for a moment and talk a little bit about the framework, how it works, and how you implemented it? And I guess the general audience that's going to be listening to this I obviously mean this with love, but our fellow nerds. So, but not all of us are super programmers. Like there's a limit where certain programming stuff just starts to go over my head. So don't feel afraid to be nerdy, but not all of us are programmers. So I guess from that, with that in mind, could you kind of describe how your framework works and basically the overview of it? Because I've been following you in your work, and I loved how you went about doing it, but I kind of want to hear it directly from you, and I want you to tell everybody.
So can I do screen sharing with this?
Absolutely, I think you can. Yeah.
I just wait a minute. Cast, is that what I should looking for? Devices? No, that's it was Chromium. I don't know exactly how I would do that. How call settings?
Funny enough, I don't think I've ever tried.
I can't really find it. I just used the Zencaster right now. So let me tell it just like it's a Python-based framework. So actually each development board has two components in that LiteX framework. One is the platform file. The platform file describes kind of what devices are on there and on which devices are connected to which pins. And that's really the tedious part, because so FPGA has hundreds and hundreds of pins, and each of them have different pin numbers, and these need to be mapped on the development board. And this is really tedious wiring an FPGA, because you have to connect hundreds and hundreds of signals, and it's already there in the LiteX board. So I take that. And the other part is the target file, and this is what is specific to the MiSTeX project. So I can there in the target file just wire up the development board with MiSTer cores. So the MiSTer has on each FPGA has a system, and which is called sys, and the system file provides all the on-screen display, the video scaler, the audio, and all the interfacing with hardware processing system, with the little Linux system which does the input. So so that's it. So if I want to support a new board, I need to write a new of the target files, which kind of and I also created a little framework which allowed me to port to use different cores on different vendor tool chains. So the original MiSTer project, of course, used the Intel Quartos toolchain and is a bit bound up in that. So and the nice thing with the LiteX is that LiteX can work on any toolchain of any vendor, of any of the major vendors, and then automatically generates the project files for the respective toolchain. So so I was able to run um, MiSTer cores like the Qbert Arcade on a Xilinx FPGA for the first time, but with the same software as the MiSTer system on the hard processor system. And because the LiteX framework would generate all the project files which are needed for the Vivado toolchain of Xilinx. And I needed a little bit of added metadata. So I added a YAML file which kind of describes which files are for which toolchain and so on. But now I've got a basic framework in place which can build different cores for different FPGAs already right now. So I've got my
So
first one, yeah.
this framework, and I want to really grasp this. So, um, is this something that you use this framework to convert existing cores to a new platform, or does it do the conversion in real time?
Um, the the answer is a bit complex. Yeah, the conversion kind of, if you want to move it to a different platform, like from Intel to Xilinx FPGAs, what I needed to do is actually to change the sys part of the cores to be able to run on the different FPGAs. So this needed to be done. And this is also a manual process. But there's also an automatic part of the process, which is kind of the adaptation to the different development boards. That's provided by the LiteX system. But I still need to adapt the sys part for the different vendor FPGA architectures. For example, and now we're getting really technical, so the clock generators on those FPGAs, they work very differently on the. So you have to use the vendor-specific clock generators for each FPGA. And what else? Yeah, it's mainly the clock generations and uh, that needs to be, so that kind of is I put into conditional blocks. So there are blocks which say if this runs on an Intel toolchain, then use this code, and if this runs on the Xilinx, then it uses another part of the code. So so then that takes care of running on different FPGAs. So and also another goal of the framework is to kind of eliminate one of the weaknesses of the MiSTer project. I think the main weakness is that the sys part, the system part, which kind of handles all the communication with the Linux system and also the um, input and screen rotation and everything, that is copy pasted to each MiSTer core. So a copy of that is in each MiSTer core, and all of the cores have a different version of it. Some have a newer, some have an older version. And if you change something in the system, you will have to manually copy it into every MiSTer core in the project. And that's a lot of work, which is actually done much better by a computer because it's extremely repetitive. And so one of my next goals is that, so the MiSTer project has a template core which contains the newest system, which is just a template core is just kind of a noise in the background and a little menu. But with the most up-to-date system, and now with my Python-based framework, I can kind of assemble the files of the project from Python. So not interactively, but programmatically, so dynamically. I can dynamically assemble a project, and that gives me a lot of flexibility. So, and what I'm going to do in the very, very near future is that I use the system part only for from the template core, and then from all if I want to port all other MiSTer cores, I just disregard it and I use just the one from the template core, so that I won't have to copy those changes to every other core. And if there's a mismatch, then I just would need to upgrade the core to work with the latest system of the MiSTer. So that would probably be the best way to go. Then we have real flexibility there. You can just then you can move to, if the sys on the template core supports it, then all the other cores will support it too. And then it only needs to be changed once. And because of the Python framework, it can assemble each core with the latest sys. And this is
So
a very
if somebody takes their core that they've written, and this is, this is one of my very favorite parts about this. So I'll do the general overview and then please fill in the blanks. But somebody takes the core that they've built, that they've spent so much time on, they've worked their butts off, they got it running, it's great on MiSTer, but now they want to make it work on other platforms. To port it to your framework, to then port it to other pieces of hardware, is far easier. And I'm not saying it's easy. You can't just walk up and have never done this before and run a file and do it. But compared to the work of reverse engineering and writing a core, it's way easier to do that, to use your framework to port it to multiple platforms, than it would be to start from scratch, right?
Yeah, it's actually much, much, much easier, because the thing is, the MiSTer sys provides a very abstract or unified interface to each core. So the MiSTer sys to each arcade core, it acts like a kind of a virtual machine, a black box.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only thing you have to change in your custom core is actually the clock generation. It's called the PLLs, the phase lock loops. So and if you need just to supply a clock generation clock for each kind of different FPGA architecture. You probably would need one for Xilinx 7 series, one for the Intel Cyclone 5, one for the Intel, the smaller ones for the Max 10 and Cyclone 4. So, and that's not much work. You can do that if everything goes well in maybe in 5 to 10 minutes or something like that. So,
That is awesome. So,
or a
I'm
couple of,
sorry for everybody listening that it
or an
took me,
hour maybe.
40 minutes to get there, but this is really like the killer feature of this is the work that you're doing is allowing people to all the things that we talked about, faster platforms, cheaper platforms, longevity. The work that you're doing is allowing people to do that so much more efficiently. And at the same time, it's embracing all of the work that was already done. You're not spitting in the face of all of these developers saying, you should have done it this way. No, no, no. Everything's cool. Your work is awesome. But if you want to evolve it, here's a way that we could bring it to more platforms easily. So that's just, in my strong opinion, there's nothing but positivity here.
So actually, it's not only that, but why I took the MiSTer is because Chotego, the very famous FPGA core developer, he said the reason why MiSTer is so successful is that because of the menu system, the Linux, that little Linux system. So I wanted that, and my current fork of that or branch of that actually has not relatively contained modifications. So I can actually even relatively easy pull all the new updates from the MiSTer project. So without a lot of hassle. I cut a lot of corners there, but the code base actually it's only a couple of files which I changed mainly. One of them dramatically, which is the communication between the FPGA and the system, but because of that, I can really pull all the updates from the MiSTer project into my project. And also from each core, yeah? Because I try to keep the modifications to the cores and or the menu system to a minimum, and so that is so the improvements from the MiSTer project continue to flow here.
That's
Uh,
so important. That
so
is
it's a
so important
synergy.
because let's just say hypothetically the DE10 Nano disappears tomorrow. You can never buy them again. They just hypothetically speaking, let's just say So now it fractures, and now people are using 5 or 6 different pieces of hardware. Now developers don't have to manually support all of the different hardwares, and there's not going to be any worried about, well, which one is this developer supporting? No, just keep doing your same work, and then your project will just pull all those updates down and allow it to be distributed. So obviously, I hope all other developers jump on board and keep this in mind, but the way you're going about doing it doesn't force people to do multiple work every time they need to do an update. They could just continue to do it for the DE10 and it still would get implemented, right?
Yeah. So, but there's still one thing that needs to be done. You need to build a bitstream for each individual FPGA. Yeah? So each FPGA needs a different configuration file because that's
Right.
very intimately tied into how the FPGA is built. And but the nice thing about is this can be automated with the LiteX framework. So if you have a beefy machine or something like that, you can just run a bunch of scripts and then it runs for maybe a night or a couple of days or whatever, depends on how much you build. And then you've got all the cores ready for that.
That is awesome. That is such a cool way to approach it. And this also opens up the doors to so many different ideas because a lot of us have been daydreaming, floating around the idea of what if the next revision of the hardware, or what if one of the next revisions is something like a dual FPGA with a graphics card in it. So imagine, just for sake of visualization, imagine a D10 Nano with a PCI Express by 16 slot on the side, and you plug in a modern graphics card. That's way over the top. I'm saying that just for visualizations here. But, the thought is, what if someday you could adapt these cores to then offload the video processing to a different GPU, so you could do something like have the N64 emulated, but then also have everything rendered, basically getting all of the advantages of hardware emulation and software emulation at the same time. You could render in higher resolutions, things that you couldn't really do with the DE10 and with original hardware, but with all of the low latency and the accuracy of FPGA. And a lot of my friends who have been talking about that, it's a huge undertaking. But then one of the concerns that was always brought up was, well, what if we do all this work and it's only one set of hardware and nobody else ports the cores over and nobody buys it? And now the thought of doing something like that, knowing that it would be easier to transition the cores over, I think that might spark some more creativity on the hardware side of things too, because now it's, the doors have been opened to different possibilities. And, for all of my dev friends, I know I'm skimming over all the details there. I'm daydreaming in the clouds. I know that's way harder than I'm making it seem, but it feels like more possibilities are becoming less of a daydream because there is not the confines of fracturing the project, because you wouldn't be fracturing the project at all.
Yeah, but actually, this is our goal, but it's not fracturing, but modularizing. Yeah? The current
Mhm.
code is quite opaque, which means it's very tied to the technology. And this is also where the LiteX framework comes in, because the LiteX framework is really excellent at modularizing that. So you can build system with the LiteX, for example, you can build system on a chip with 10 different CPUs. You just need to pass it a different command, and then it has a different CPU in it. You can switch from ARM to RISC-V to PowerPC to a lot of different CPUs. You can swap them out just with one command. And the nice thing, what you said about the PCI Express, is that LiteX project also has PCI Express cores, which are open source. So what you
Oh,
can
wow.
already do right now, you could take this card here, um, the $200, and you see that has a PCI Express port on it. You
Yeah.
could put in use the LiteX core in there, and then, for example, you could plug in the FPGA card into your PC as an accelerator, and then you could play the retro games on your PC, but the PC only handles the display, and so you have output, but the game runs on the FPGA, and the video output goes over PCI Express with very low latency, and you can play it on the PC. Something like that would be possible.
So that daydream idea is now a little bit more of a reality. There could potentially be something where you offload the graphics processing to the GPU then, right? if you
Yeah,
place it
and
in your computer like that. Yeah.
then for that you would need a PCI root complex. I'm not sure if the LiteX has a root complex on it, but I think somebody did this. I'm not sure, maybe. But it's certainly possible. But the other thing, I don't really know the higher end cores. I read some discussions on the internet that for the more recent hardware, like the newer PlayStations or so, it's because those computers look more and more like modern PCs, more or less. Huh? So
Hmm.
the modern PlayStations and also the yeah, Xbox, of course, Xboxes are PCs. Huh? Or
Right.
Steam Deck, yeah, Steam Deck right now is a Linux PC. So it for the more modern hardware, it doesn't make that much sense anymore to run it on an FPGA because you just would probably get farther with standard PC hardware.
I completely agree. I think Dreamcast and PS2 might be just about where that ends, with some
Something like that,
exceptions.
yeah.
The Wii might fall into that category. Some handhelds, the DS and 3DS might fall into that. But you're right. I wouldn't expect a PS3 to be run on an FPGA. Just, you know, unless somebody came up with a Power PC core. But
There's already one a PowerPC core and LiteX,
oh wow, really?
an FPGA core, yeah, PowerPC FPGA core.
All right, so the possibilities are out there, but yeah, I mean, I do see where you're going with this, and that there is a cutoff where certain things are just not. You're not going to gain anything by running them on an FPGA versus quality software emulation. But there is definitely a group of consoles in the middle there that I think probably would. PlayStation One might, N64,
Yeah,
any
that's
early
right.
3D graphics, I think would probably benefit.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the more modern consoles, which I already said, are more like PCs. So you probably won't make much of a difference uh, running it on FPGA instead. And the thing is, those modern game consoles run already pretty fast in terms of megahertz, and FPGAs actually can't go that fast. So even those higher end, like the Kintex here, can maybe run up to 200 or 300 megahertz and something. And the Power Mac I had 20 years ago already ran 600 megahertz. So yeah, there.
So I know this is kind of an out in left field question, but since you have a lot of experience with FPGAs, one of the things that I've always wondered is there some kind of open source DVD and Blu-ray core floating around that could be ported over to the MiSTer? Because one of the things that people who are into old movies and old TV shows run into is that if you pop a DVD into your Blu-ray player, you're at the mercy of whatever scaling is done in that Blu-ray player, which is often the cheapest chips available at that time. So running it in the company Oppo calls it source direct mode, but basically there are certain players out there where when you put your disc in, you could put it on a logic analyzer, and it's exactly bit for bit what is on the disc. So that allows whatever external processor to do its job. As we're progressing and there's newer, upscaling technology out there, it's kind of a big deal. But I don't think I've heard anybody talk about potential for video playback on the MiSTer project, and I don't know if it's just simply a limitation or if just no one's cared except me.
I don't really understand much about Blu-ray actually because I never owned a Blu-ray device in my life. And the thing is, actually, if you have a Blu-ray drive on your PC, actually, then you could read out the data from that perfectly and then do the rest of the needed conversion software probably. Is this what you mean, or I don't
No,
really
real time
understand the.
playback. Real time playback. So PC, Blu-ray, and DVD players are notoriously not as good as some of the higher end, just dedicated pieces of hardware because you're at the mercy of it's
What do you mean? Is
almost
it
the
the
same
menu system
complaints as
or?
software emulation. You have different processing going on. You have things changing the signal. There's a couple of friends could explain it a lot better than I could, but both technically speaking and in side by side comparisons, I've rarely gotten a scenario in which a PC would do as good of a job with the scaling of those resolutions to whatever you're going for.
Oh, you mean the scaling, right? Of the
Yeah,
video.
I mean, if you could find a way to take a PC and get, even if it's a Linux PC, especially like a little system on a chip, Raspberry Pi, whatever, if we can figure out a way to make a player that just outputs one to one what is on that disk. So
But
no
upscaled.
scaling whatsoever, no changing of the audio or video, just sending it right out. That would absolutely be all we need. And then you send it into whatever modern scaler you have, whether it's the RetroTink 4K or just some of the newer higher end TVs that have those new MediaTek scaling chips in it that are awesome. Uh, but the point is, you're still using more modern stuff than some crappy scaling chip on a Blu-ray player from 10 years ago.
You can do video scaling very well with FPGAs. That's where so real-time video processing is one of the main use cases of FPGAs, and that's also why they're used kind of in digital cameras and stuff, and missile guidance systems and stuff like that. Uh, um, so the that part would be handled very well by an FPGA because it's like you can build your own custom chip which does that in most real time. The thing is only where you need to get a real clean input signal for that. And I still don't really see the advantage if you have a software playback, so which reads a software which reads just you could convert just the files into just rip them and then up convert them and but that's not
You're
what you're
totally
looking for
correct,
somehow.
but it's just ease of use, right? So how
Because you
many
want
how many
to play.
times have you sat down and gone, I really want to watch this TV show? So let me rip the disc, run it through
Yeah,
my
yeah.
upscaling process, wait for it to finish. We'll do a 3-pass version and then we'll wait. So versus like, okay, I have a disc or I just have the MKV uncompressed rip of the disc sitting on a server somewhere. Let me send that through a device that could then scale it properly. And there are players out there that'll do it, but they're expensive and they're harder to find. Whereas if you could just send that file through the MiSTer into another scaler, or have the MiSTer scale it, especially for DVDs and stuff like that, that would be a huge advantage. But there would definitely be a cost involved because I think not all of the stuff would be open source. I think you'd have to buy certain decoder licenses, but you could also do this on a Raspberry Pi. So the fact that it's available elsewhere means it's not impossible. But I figured I would ask because it would just be neat to have that option at some point, even though that's not at all the focus of the project. I totally get that.
Yeah, well, that would be a different project actually. So, and I also would need to look a bit into the details of how the Blu-ray data is structured and all that, so I can say much about it from right
Hmm.
impromptu, if you like. But yeah,
Yeah, sorry. I tend to
have you tried a VLC kind of the video LAN player and
Yeah.
open?
Oh, I've tried everything. I've tried
So
everything. I've had, any video files listening are going to be excited and annoyed with me because it's a lot deeper than this. And if you, I guess the best way to put it is if you go and you buy a very good TV, you buy a TCL brand TV, and you hook up VLC player or your PC or a good Ultra HD Blu-ray player or even an Apple TV box, it's going to look awesome. You're going to have zero complaints. But if you go out and you spend the money on a really nice OLED, then you take a little bit of time to calibrate it, and then you buy a high-end player to play your movies versus plug your computer into it, you're going to see a difference, definitely.
oh, okay.
So this is definitely for the higher end crowd. Most people are not going to care at all plugging in an Apple TV, which I'm not an Apple fanboy, but the Apple TV does a great job with a lot of stuff, especially with different software people have had where you could just play files over your network. So this is really, I guess, I think a lot of people who might be into this as well probably come to the conclusion of why am I going to waste months of my time porting this over to the MiSTer when I could just get an Apple TV box and get 99% of what Bob's talking about here. So I get it. It's just my crazy brain always looking for the next thing and always kind of seeing where there's holes in the community that haven't been filled yet. If anybody other than me even cares about this. So
Okay, yeah, well, can definitely look into that, I guess. It's just I'm not really much into entertainment industry at all, so I my understanding there is kind of limited. So you need to maybe that we could take that offline. You could help me understand really what the difference is.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I could figure out what would be the best approach for that. But yeah, the technical stuff takes a lot of time. I have very little time left for actually entertainment, and entertainment usually tends to bore me very quickly. So yeah, I really love the Pixar movies, but they
Yeah.
are come on, or yeah, kind of those computer animated movies. I really like them. I like to watch them with my family, but
That's
they
how I
don't
turn
come
my
so
brain off
often.
at the end of every night. At the almost every night, when I'm trying to wind down and my brain is just thinking about all the different projects I'm working on and want to work on and new ideas, and watching, just sitting down on a couch, pouring a drink. Doesn't even have to be alcohol. It could just be a water with a lemon in it. Anything that's not just water. But having a drink and watching something on TV is how I turn my brain off. So 90%, if not 95% of the stuff I watch wouldn't matter. A documentary looking perfect is not going to be any better than a documentary looking fine. But
Yeah,
occasionally you get like a really cool Pixar movie that has amazing animation, and you start to see 3-2 pull down judder where that drives some people crazy, and you see some crosstalk. And there's just there's little things where it doesn't make the experience bad, but people who care about this stuff, video files, will see the difference the same exact way that people with good ears into audio will
yeah,
will explain to you the difference between the $1,000 and the $100 speakers.
yeah,
Most people don't care, though. Most people don't. I'm the first to admit
definitely.
that.
Yeah.
So, where at the moment, where is the project? I mean, all of your stuff is on. I'll link to your GitHub, of course, and actually, I'll just
Yeah.
link to your main root page that has all of your other links in there as well.
Yeah,
Um,
the MiSTeX organization contains all the files, and as soon as I have something that works, I push it on there. So you uh, have, in principle, you've got everything there. It's
And you
not
have a list of
very
hardware that you've tested up there as well, correct?
well. I've bought definition for the boards, which I could make it work. I upload board definition files, which are not many in the moment. There's one for the Cyclone 5 and one for the Xilinx right now. And the Thoracic Decker board is in work. I'm probably push the first version soon. So yeah, I could make the HDMI work and the OSD, but the game file doesn't show up the video. I don't know where it gets lost. So I need to figure that out. As soon as I've got that done, then I will push that too. And I make no binary releases yet. Uh, and also, yeah, I've got no real the hardware which I made. It gathered quite a bit of attention, and people thought, where can I buy it? And actually, I deliberately chose the Decker board because it's not available anymore. Because the guys who tend to have it are FPGA developers, so they all have it, and this is intended to be a development platform right now, because the thing is. A part of the process is kind of to figure out what would be the ideal setup for this hardware wise. So because there are the different goals here, one is cost saving, the other is maybe going to bigger FPGAs. So I thought maybe the sweet spot would be the 100K size, which is the same as a MiSTer. And uh, but you could make it happen for probably, yeah, if it's the board is open source, you could maybe make it everything happen for maybe $150. Well, but that's probably not as exciting, because for $70 more you have something that is perfectly polished and so on. So probably in future, probably the perspective of bigger FPGAs would be more attractive to people, I guess. But I'm not so sure about it. That's a part of the process, kind of to find it out. And with the QM boards, it's actually nice. You could go both ways at once,
I think it's
because
both. I
because they
think if
had
somebody
the
took the time to make a board, an add-on board, or maybe just the entire thing
well.
that was cheaper and
I
available.
I'm going to design it, yeah, but I want, so why I use the Deca board, because the Deca board has the same HDMI chip on it as the MiSTer, so the exact same, and this chip costs about $5 or so if I want to put it on my own PCB, and so I use this Deca board because I already have it, and to kind of to find out how to use the chip, and yeah, and to see how porting that works. And I probably could even replace the chip totally by FPGA circuitry too. So the LiteX project has an HDMI core on it, which could make the whole chip actually superfluous. So,
Hmm.
and this is kind of why it's a development where I need to figure out what would be the best way to go forward, because this would kind of save me maybe $5 or $7 per bucks dollars per board, yeah, in cost,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and a handful of components. But on the other hand, then I would have less space in the FPGA, and I need to see how much would that be, and so there's a lot of trade-offs involved, and this is what the Deca board also helps me figure out. So the next step, of course, is uh, the uh, the game console port for the QMTech form factor boards. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so this is definitely going to be something like that, like my audio interface, which is also uh, like here, that
Mm-hmm.
I create an daughter board for that. Actually, I want two small ones on each side, because for the production, PCB production, small boards are a lot cheaper than bigger boards, a lot cheaper. And yeah, you know it probably from TLC PCB. And yeah, and I guess that might maybe cost something like, without the Allwinner D1 chip, might cost something like maybe 30-40 bucks to make one in small quantities. Of course, much cheaper in large quantities assembled. So yeah, with the Allwinner D1, so with the RTX board was 80 plus 40 for the IO board. Then we would be at 120 plus the Allwinner D1. It's just $16. You would be at something like 140, with specs comparable to the MiSTer. Of course, QMTech has a RTX 200 T board, which is double the size, and it only costs about $10 more or so, or $20 more. Yeah? So, but
So,
the thing
from
is, it's
a
not very
user point of
available.
view,
Yep.
is it not available because it's not out yet, or is it just not
No,
going to be available anymore?
stock seems to be limited, so there are only a couple of them
Mm.
left. I got one of those, but I don't know, will they make new ones or not? You don't really know. So I saw that with they had the Cyclone 420K boards, which were really cheap at the time. They were only $20 or so for a board, or 30 at most. And then they went out of stock, and then that was it. So for my audio
Mm.
interface, so that was gone. So I don't really know. So, and the RTX 100 boards, they have still 100 of those in stock. So I guess that would be the safest thing to build a first version on. And yeah, because of the framework, you can move into different directions, but you still have to build all the FPGA cores for the different platforms and so on.
So I'm
And,
in
and
kind of an interesting position though, because my entire career has been nerdy stuff, so I understand the technical part. But doing retro RGB, I'm talking to users so much of the time. More than probably more about 50%, if not more. So the problem most users have with the MiSTer project and the hardware around it is, what do I buy? Oh, well, you buy this, but then you plug that into it, but then don't buy this, buy that if you need this feature, but then you have to plug
yeah,
this into that to get this. And it's very overwhelming for somebody to get started who isn't rooted in
yeah,
nerdiness or arcade boards. Or so having, even if the price ended up being about the same, having a board that you just buy that's like, here is this, that's all
yeah.
you need.
Yeah, and
And that
I
alone
need
would
the
be big.
requirements for that. So I am not really a game person. So you probably would be an ideal person to get some to give me some fill me in on that, because you really know what the users out there want. I don't really know. I'm not a gamer, and I have no idea what those guys really want or need.
I could very
So
easily, after we get off of this call, walk you through all of that. And it's very frustrating because a lot of developers, they just don't listen. Well, no. That's stupid. All you need is to plug this into that. Yeah, but if you've never done that before, why do you want to plug other stuff into things? Why do you want a snake's nest of just make it? No, that's stupid. And it's frustrating sometimes working with hardware developers because some are awesome and I love working with them, and some just they can't see the perspective other than their own. And I know, it's human nature, right? We all run into that problem at some point. But being somebody that walks that line where half of my day I'm talking to my nerd friends, and the other half of the day I'm talking to the user base, it's very easy for me to tell what things are upsetting people that are so easily fixable on the nerd side, and which things that are not easily fixable. Like, why can't I have this beautiful, gorgeous UI with, with animations going across and everything else? It's like, well, that's a lot more that goes into that when you're using FPGAs. It seems like an easy
Yeah, that's
problem,
really
but it's it's not a problem that I think people should be worrying about right now. But why do I need to plug five things into each other to get to my end goal? That's a very valid concern, and that's something that's limiting everybody's work here. And the other thing that I see that really bothers me too is people don't really see the domino effect, and even bigger companies, right? Like companies like Pound, that infamous company that makes those crappy HDMI adapters for consoles. They don't see that what they're actually doing by selling garbage is losing future business. And it's, well, MiSTer's open source. Why is there a business about it? It's way bigger than that. It's, you're losing people who would love what you do. So people that have Patreon accounts would have more subscribers. People that don't care about money and they do this for fun would at least get more people telling them how awesome they are. And I know that's not why a lot of these devs do this. They don't do it so they could get high fives, but it's still really nice to know when people love your work, and when there's such small things that could be done that drive people, or that will bring more people in. I see how much could be gained from this, from everybody. And I guess maybe it's pompous for me to say that I see it and other people don't, but I I mean, I see it every day, and there's so many amazing people in the MiSTer scene, and I want everybody to treat them like rock stars. And the people that get it do, but more people would get it if we just made it, some things, a little bit more welcoming. And the D10 Nano is a subsidized product that you can get so much cheaper.
Yeah, and it's
That
also a development board and not a user product. Yeah, so it's
right.
that is the thing. But so I really like the ideas you said. If we just make the periphery, make it like kind of a more like a console experience where just everything is there, and people don't care about much. If that would be worth them, then that would be a real how you say, a real use case, huh? For having
Yeah.
just even a same sized F project. So
And with the stuff that you're showing and the examples that you're showing, we're talking about around the same price, that still embraces the same developers, that doesn't really like the framework that you've laid out allows all of this to happen with so much less stress than it could have before. So I'm seeing the dominoes fall starting with your project, and I just think this has the potential to grow MiSTer, and grow it in a way where all of the existing devs and contributors grow with it. We're not leaving anybody behind by jumping on this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I
it's
still can put all
inflating the
of their
balloon for
contributions.
everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
would be nice. So yeah, the plan is the also the lead developer of the LightX project also showed some interest. Maybe he wants to get on board someday in the future. If he is incredibly busy and he's a very in demand guy. Uh, I have more leisure time because I work from an NGO right now. I'm full-time open source developer, so I can make a little side project here and there. And yeah, yeah. From the future perspective, I don't know. If should I set up a Patreon account? I don't know. If I get money for it, then I get obligated to. Then it's not as much fun anymore in a way, because. But on the other hand, yeah, it would be. I really just like working with it because right now my paid work is also for open source, but I'm writing an open source. If I'm developing, no, I'm contributing to an open source FPGA toolchain for the Xilinx FPGAs. That's
hmm,
my paid work right now. But if I only write the software for the toolchain, I feel like a baker who doesn't eat bread. Yeah, because I write
yeah.
FPGA toolchains, but I don't use them. Yeah. So I want to have some time where I really do something with the FPGAs and do some hardware stuff. And the MiSTeX project was really a lot of fun for that. Yeah, and so my motivation is actually in open source is this. I benefited over all the 4 decades so much from other open source projects. I grew up with open source, so I had this experience when we were all teenagers, and my older brother, he exchanged kind of software with a computer club, and one day the police appeared and took everything away, all the computers. And my older brother, they had to show up at the police office and answer some questions and stuff, but he was still a minor. He had no idea that that was illegal. Huh? We also didn't. And after that experience, I swore to myself, either I'm going to buy software or I'm using, it was called public domain. And so in the Amiga, this is how I really got into open source. So on the Amiga, I started using the GNU compiler and LaTeX and all the open source stuff. And now, after all those years learning with that and growing with that, I'm for the first time really able to contribute something back, to give something back. And I want to do something which is fun and interesting to me, but which is also really useful for other people. Otherwise, I would feel if it's not useful to others, it's kind of a waste of time, because I want to give something back which is meaningful to others. Yeah. So that is my motivation. I could, of course, with my skills, earn a ton of money, but with my health, it's clear that money doesn't make much difference anymore. I live in Indonesia, where life is pretty cheap. So, and
Yeah, you can't buy happiness.
yeah,
I mean,
right.
that's a stupid saying, but it's also very true. So
And luxuries are, yeah, I'm not, luxuries are absolutely pointless. You get used to them so quickly, and then they do nothing for you, and except cost a lot. And so what really makes you happy is if you do something which is helps others in some way, and also, yeah, where your talents kind of help making the world a little bit better in some corners. Yeah, and that's what I try to do, and I hope. And that's why I also do the FPGA toolchain development. So it's really exciting to be uh,
yeah,
to do
I feel you
something back.
there.
Right.
Doing RetroRGB full time is quite a lot different in the paycheck point of view than the career I gave up to do this, and I just, it makes me very happy. I love helping other people. I love working with amazing devs. So I get 100% where you're going with this. You know, I could have been some hotshot project manager making buttloads of money, but I would never be home. You know, I wouldn't
Yeah.
get to work with the variety of amazing people that I get to work with. I wouldn't get to do silly stuff like put a picture of me flipping the bird on the front of a T-shirt. Like it's a story for another day. But yeah, it's I'm very happy to be here. So it sounds like you are as well, and I
Uh,
appreciate your time both in the work that you're doing and for this interview too. This was great.
yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I also like very much this is kind of the same approach. Like, Mr. Beast, everybody knows him. My sons introduced me to him, and he has kind of that kind of motivation, and that's surely an inspiration. Yeah.
Hmm.
And yeah, yeah, like Viktor Frankl said, actually, uh, what really matters in your life is kind of the meaning. You is the meaning. You do something meaningful. Yeah, that is what makes you happy, if you do something meaningful. And
Yeah.
whatever that is, yeah, it can be creating something, it can be experiencing something, and it can be loving someone. Yeah, that's what Viktor Frankl said. The main 3 things which create meaning in your life are those 3 things: creating something, loving someone, or experiencing kind of the beauty of the world that is around us. And yeah, so this is kind of part of creating something, what I'm doing here, and yeah, what you are doing too. And yeah, and I hope that will make the world a little better for
I couldn't
someone.
think of a better way to close this one out. Thank you so much for your time, Hans, and hopefully I will be following up with you in a couple months or a year to talk about, where this project is going. So thank you.
You're welcome.